I'm not sure. Again, I say this every month, but we are at the end of another month. We're actually at the end of the third quarter of the year. Yep, it is the end of September. Hey everyone, it's Ray. Welcome to my little bookish corner of the world, which is forever changing as new books keep on getting added to the shelves. Today I am doing my roundup of the 3 one-star review books I read in September. Not my ratings of 1 star, but other people's. And I thought it'd be really an interesting project. I started around May to start clearing some of the TBR because it is getting massively unmanageable. If I had it piled up on the floor, it would be taller than me and my 6'5" nephew with no problem. However, I figured it was easier to put a load of 1-star reviews for the books remaining on my shelf in a jar and pick 3 out every single month, read them, and then say, does this book really deserve this quite harsh 1-star review? So my books for September were The Other Bennet Sister by Janice Hadlow, a rather nondescript cover for To Cage a God by Elizabeth May, a fantasy novel. And then I had a historical mystery, The Beholders by Hester Musson. Now, I actually read them in that order because I knew that The Other Bennet Sister, which is quite a chunky one, it's probably the thickest book I've read as part of this challenge this year. I knew it was going to take me some time, and it's the first book I've actually got creases in the spine because it's quite a chunky novel. So the review for that was, this was not well written, and I can't imagine the horror of spending another 430 pages with this girl. Now, this, for those of you who don't know it, is historical. It is based, it's kind of like a sequel to Jane Austen's Pride and Prejudice, but instead of following the more popular Lizzie and Jane with their husbands Darcy and Bingley, or even youngest flighty daughter Lydia and her husband Wickham, this follows the life of middle daughter Mary, who is she's plain, or she's considered plain. She is bookish, so she would also be considered a blue stocking, whereas her 2 sisters, who are also quite intelligent, are not perceived this way. And she does everything she can to fit in. In the book, in Pride and Prejudice, she is something of an extra in the family's life. And the summary of the book is, it is a sad fact of life that if a young woman is unlucky enough to come into the world without expectations, she had better do all she can to ensure she is born beautiful. To be poor and handsome is misfortune enough, but to be penniless and plain is a hard fate indeed. This is, I have to admit that when I started reading the book, I found it incredibly slow going. I struggled greatly with the characterization of Mary, and though I disliked Mrs. Bennet in Pride and Prejudice, I found her quite a humorous, she wasn't a funny person, but her character was made to be something, it was almost satirical mockery. That is how I always perceived Pride and Prejudice in general, is a satire about status, money, and entitlement. And The Other Bennet Sister starts off by repeating those errors, or repeating that particular mythology or philosophy around society in this particular era in the early 1800s. However, it is so slow, and it is such a daunting book because it is nearly 700 pages long, that I started to dread picking it up. It took me quite a while to read it, and this month, as you'll find in my roundup of of September reads, you'll see that I didn't actually read very much because I was constantly battling with my I really don't want to read this book mindset. However, now this is where I am going to add a caveat to my I struggled with this book. I got to just over halfway through the story because it starts with Mary being the only unmarried Bennet sister left. And then, as we all know, if her father dies, the house goes to Mr. Collins and his wife Charlotte Lucas. And sadly, Mr. Bennet passes away, and Mary and her mother are left to make their way in the world. Luckily, they have two daughters. Mrs. Bennet has two daughters who have married well. Jane, who married Mr. Bingley, who has a fortune of his own, and Elizabeth, Lizzie, who married Mr. Darcy, who has a significantly larger amount of money. And of course, he has Pemberley and everything else. So he is not without means. When Mr. Bennet passes away, Mrs. Bennet and Mary head off to Jane's to live with her and Mr. Bingley. However, Jane is obviously the new woman in the house. She has a young child, and her sister-in-law, Caroline Bingley, one of the most detestable but strong characters in Pride and Prejudice, is also living with the family because she is a spinster sister as well. She doesn't seem to equate her own situation with that of Mary and is constantly judging and making bitter snipes at the younger girl, not failing to acknowledge the fact that she is in the same situation, and also taking out a lot of her bitterness on the fact that Lizzie has ended up with Darcy, who was her intended victim. I'm not going to go into the ins and outs of Pride and Prejudice because I think that's a book that you need to read for yourself. And I've got a cat hair in my nose, so I apologise. But Mary, unfortunately, finds it very difficult to cope with living in the same house as Caroline Bingley and heads off on her own to spend time with Lizzie and Mr. Darcy. This starts out really well. However, when Georgiana Darcy returns to Pemberley to stay, Mary starts feeling a little bit left out. She is out of the loop. Lizzie and her were never very close as sisters. Lizzie was always very close with Jane, and Lydia and Kitty were also incredibly close to each other. She was kind of the odd man out, and she was incredibly conscious of this. So when Georgiana Darcy arrives back at Pemberley, Mary starts to realise that this isn't her place either, and she heads back to stay at Longbourn with Charlotte Lucas and Mr. Collins, who have some children, but they also have a very seemingly unhappy marriage. Mary feels at home here. She has access to an incredible library, is given access to the library and given free access to the rest of the house, and develops some kind of tundra for Mr. Collins, who seems to reciprocate, which immediately sets Charlotte on edge. And of course, if you remember, we have Lady Catherine de Bourgh, and she is originally Mr. Collins' benefactor or benefactress. And she turns up at Longbourn and suggests that Mary would be ideally suited to live the life of a governess, and sets about to try and organise this for her. Not happy with the idea of that, and realising that she has outstayed her welcome at Longbourn with Charlotte and Mr. Collins, she heads off to stay with her aunt and uncle in London, Mr. and Mrs. Gardiner, who play quite a considerable part in Pride and Prejudice. And this is where the story picks up. And I know that I've gone a long way around talking about the bit that I found quite dull, but I think it is setting the scene. However, I don't think it needed to be anywhere near the 320 odd pages that it ended up being, because once Mary hits London, she suddenly is, the light comes into her. She is reborn as a new person. She has far more confidence. She is no longer sitting under the shadow of her sisters. Her aunt and uncle have sons, not daughters. So Mrs. Gardner is in her element. She is taking Mary to places that she wouldn't really get the opportunity to take her sons, and they are having fun. Mary is finally coming into her own, and then she meets Thomas, and I've got to look the name up because the surname has completely missed me. Then she meets Thomas Hayward, who is a lawyer. He is a friend of the Gardners, and her world expands again. If I were going to judge the book on the first half, then I would be saying, oh dear God, this deserves a 1-star review, or at least a 1.5 on Storygraph. It deserves that. It was well written. It did take me back to the time of Pride and Prejudice. However, it didn't move quick enough for me. I love the speed with which Pride and Prejudice goes through the motions of Jane and Bingley meeting, Jane becoming sick and having to stay with the Bingleys, and Lizzie turning up. The chemistry between Darcy and Lizzie is electric, and I love that. And I will say here, do not watch the 2005 movie. My personal opinion, 1995 TV series is far superior. And yes, the film, the black and white film, and I'm now trying to remember who was in it, that is also very good. However, I do still prefer the 1995 TV series. It helped me get through my A-levels. But anyway, the other Bennett sister, I would say, in fact, I rated it 3.754 stars, purely because of the second half of the book. If it had been just one bit and, oh, here's a sequel, I'd have gone, no, I'm done. But I think that Janice Hadlow did a really good job with part 2. Everything after London is great. The next book I read was To Cage a God by Elizabeth May. This is a proof copy that I got at the end of last year, and I apologise greatly that I didn't read it earlier, but I had so many amazing books come in last year that I just couldn't determine what I was going to read. So the review that I got for that was, the good thing about this book is that it's so short and easy to read, so it won't take up much of your time. Now, sure, I have an issue with, because even the hard copy, the hardback final copy of this book is over 450 pages long. In fact, no, I'm saying 450, it's 441 pages long, including a tiny glossary at the back with a dictionary, which is about as much use as a fried egg when you've got an egg allergy. And the book is, I'm going to read the summary so that you know what it is about. It is a fantasy. Join the rebellion to burn down a cruel tyrant. Using ancient secrets, Galena and Sarah's mother crafted gods into their bones. With their country on the brink of war, it falls to these sisters, raised as weapons, to take the helm of the rebellion and end the cruel reign of a royal family possessed by destructive gods. While Sarah reunites with her estranged lover, who now leads the rebellion, Galena must infiltrate the palace to expose the Empire's lies. In this world of deception and danger, her only refuge is an isolated princess whose whip-smart tongue and sharp gaze threaten to uncover Galena's secrets. Now, this book actually originally came out on February the 20th, 2024, so it's still quite a new book, and I know that there is a sequel. It's a duology. However, you don't need to read the second book. There is a definitive ending, though if you want to find out what happens after all of the explosions and everything end, then the sequel will be needed. I found Sarah and Galena quite interesting characters, but I did feel as though I had entered the story halfway through. There is no background. We don't get to know very much about the history of these gods and how they became merged with this particular royal family and a lot of other nobility, the noble families. You don't get to find any of that out. You just come in to the point where, well, all of this lore exists, and this word to describe the royal families and everything is there, but there is no explanation of any of it. And while I quite enjoyed it, and I did read it quite quickly in comparison with the other Bennet sister because there was far more intricate plot, I didn't find it to have that much substance. It was exciting enough. The characters their chemistry with their respective lovers. In the case of Galena, it was this princess, so there is a LGBTQ representation, which I think is good in this particular world. I didn't enjoy this book as much as I hoped to. I know that the published versions are stunning, and when I first got this, it was like, ooh, that looks really good. And I would have read it earlier had it not been for such an incredible number of great releases this year. But I don't think I need the sequel, and I don't think it's ever going to be my next romantic fantasy obsession, as the back of the book declares. It was good enough. It was not deserving of a 1-star review, and I don't understand where this got. Whoever reviewed it and said, "Oh, this is an incredibly short book," what were they reading prior to this? Because I still think that 440 pages, especially when there is a lot of use of a made up, almost Russian seeming or sounding language being used throughout, that meant I kept on having to look back at the glossary and at the back of the book. That did disrupt my reading somewhat. It would have been, I actually can't believe I'm saying this, but I would have liked it if they'd had footnotes. And I really don't believe I'm saying this, but I think footnotes would have been quite handy when it comes to referring to certain elements of world building that it was quite lacking, and also elements of the language that they were using, because there were 2 other languages that seemed as though they had a Russian structure. So that was To Cage a God by Elizabeth May. I don't think I'll be reading the sequel. In fact, I know I won't be reading the sequel. I've said this about a few books in the last couple of months and then found myself ordering them, but this one just doesn't appeal, and I don't think it needs a sequel because it had quite a structured and satisfying ending. So that's To Cage a God. And the final book I actually only finished yesterday, and as I record this, it is actually the 25th of September. So I'm quite happy with myself for having finished this when I did, because I was very doubtful that I was going to get to the point where The Beholders ended up on my finished list for September, mostly because I really wanted to pick up something else. This is a historical mystery, and it highlights a lot of unfairness in the world at this particular period of time. The 1-star review for this was, "I lay awake in anger at how I had wasted several hours of my life reading this garbage. I was so incredibly bored the whole book." It wasn't quite that bad, I don't think, personally. I didn't rate it incredibly highly. This is actually an autographed copy, but anyway. June 1878, the body of a boy is pulled from the depths of the Thames, suspected to be the beloved missing child of the widely admired Liberal MP Ralph Gethin. 4 months earlier, Harriet Watkins is a young maid newly employed at Finton Hall. Fleeing the drudgery of an unwanted engagement in the small village where she grew up, Harriet is entranced by the grand country hall. She is entranced too by her glamorous mistress, Clara Gethin, whose unearthly singing voice floats through the house. But Clara, though captivating, is erratic. The master of the house is a much lauded politician, but he is strangely absent, and some of their beautiful belongings seem to tell terrible stories. Unable to ignore her growing unease, Harriet sets out to discover their secrets. When she uncovers a shocking truth, a chain of events is set in motion that could cost Harriet everything, including her freedom. Now, this story starts off, as actually a couple of the books I've read this month have, very slowly. It's a historical mystery, so it's the second historical in my selection. And it is essentially... It starts with Harriet moving from her original house where she was serving an elderly lady called Mrs. B, who unfortunately passed away, and she moves to the home of the Gethins, the MP, who she doesn't meet until quite far on in the story, and his young wife, Clara Gethin, who has had a baby and is seemingly absent-minded and very distracted. But not only that, she's also quite uneasy around her son, Edward. Now, the parts of the story that I enjoyed were the ones where we realise Harriet is not as naive and unaware of the world as it appears she initially is when she moves into the Gethin's home, and she is made a lady's maid, so she is serving Clara Gethin directly. They have an interesting bond, and it appears that Clara trusts Harriet far more than she's trusted several other people in the house. She also unearths a number of mysteries. Certain things go missing. A ribbon that she uses to tie around letters from her increasingly frustrated mother, who is angry at the fact that Harriet has missed out on marrying this incredibly eligible bachelor from the village she grew up in because she has taken so much time to make the decision on this, and then postponed going home at all because she really doesn't want to marry him. She doesn't want to be stuck there. She wants to travel. She wants to experience life. And this grandiose desire, as her family sees it, is courtesy of her previous employer, Mrs. B, who didn't want her to settle. Clara and Harriet develop quite a close bond, and then all of a sudden, Edward Gethin goes missing, and a body is discovered, and there is a complicated court case. There is a lot of underlying sinister machinations going on surrounding Barrett, the gentleman's aide, and Mr. Gethin, the MP. You end up feeling very unsettled, I think is actually, no, that's how I felt. I felt quite unsettled. As I moved further through the book, I kind of knew what was going to happen, and you find out some very unpleasant things about the MP, who is lauded and felt to be incredibly generous and doing all these wonderful things for the downtrodden of society. And then you realise that actually he had really unlikable intentions when it came to all of these things. He was putting on a facade and people fell for it. Doesn't sound familiar at all, does it? I actually read this really quickly. I skim read bits and then I went back and I reread them. And though I can't say I enjoyed the book, it was well written. It had an intriguing subject matter. It was intriguing subject, fascinating period of history, because obviously it's not something we're going to experience now there is an upstairs downstairs environment in many stately homes, but we don't tend to, the common people don't tend to experience that, and most people aren't going to be the servant. There are some, but it's not going to be treated the same way. There is no longer that massively different hierarchy in a household. I found Harriet quite frustrating at times. I wanted to slap her upside the head, but I think she did the right thing, and she did it for the right reasons. I just found it annoying. It's just me. But as I said, I don't think I can say I enjoyed the book because of the subject matter, because the content was quite harrowing at times, and it showed the inequality between men and women, and also between a man and his wife. He was the MP was persistently taking advantage of young maids in the household. He had a lot of influence. People fell for this charm, including Harriet to begin with, and only when they came out of that spell did things actually work in a way. It's a very confusing, intriguing mystery, and I think it was well written, but it's not something I'd sit there and say, I really enjoyed this, I recommend it. I'd recommend it if you love a mystery, but I wouldn't say you're going to enjoy this book. I gave it, I think, 3.25 stars, so 3 upgraded. Well, actually, no, 3.25 downgraded to a 3 on Goodreads, because I didn't enjoy it. I read it, I sort of liked it, but I didn't enjoy it because I found the subject matter so intensely harrowing. So that's the 3 for September, and now it's time to pick the ones for October. I'm just hoping they're not massively chunky because I really want to pick something off the shelf that isn't in this jar for next month as well. I also have a few days left of this month and I can read what I want. So I've read all the books that I needed to read for interviews and book tours and this. And of course I read another Agatha, which I will talk about in my next video because, yeah. So let's pick my first book. And I have remembered my phone so I can look up what I'm actually choosing. Okay, first one is Pinky Purple, number 6. I don't understand so utterly that I'm actually angry at the close of this book. Book 6. Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz. It's the first in a series. It has been televised, and I know that the sequel, Moonflower Murders, is currently airing, I think, on PBS in the US, and I believe in the UK it will be airing on the BBC. This is a book within a book. It is a book editor. Crime writer Alan Conway has been a best-selling author for years. Readers love his detective Atticus Pund, a celebrated solver of crimes in the sleepy villages of the 1950s. But Conway's latest tale of murder at Pye Hall is not quite what it seems. Yes, there are dead bodies and a host of intriguing suspects, but hidden in the pages of the manuscript lies another story, a tale written between the very words on the page, telling of real-life jealousy, greed, ruthless ambition, and murder. So what was it I said? I don't want a really chunky book. This isn't too bad, I don't think. In fact, it really isn't too bad. It's only 300 and something pages, but it's incredible. Oh, no. Oh, it's a novel within a novel. So the page numbers do not make any sense whatsoever. I remembered it's a novel within a novel, but actually looking at the structure of this book is going to confuse me somewhat. So that's Magpie Murders by Anthony Horowitz. It's the first in a cozy crime or cozy mystery series that he wrote, and I do like his novels. He wrote the entire Alex Rider series, which I read with my nephew when he was a lot younger. Okay, so that's first one. Second one, this has got purple edges, doesn't mean anything really. 22. I think I know what this book is already. I'm going to say this is, even before I read it, I'm going to say it is Lady Macbethad by Isabel Schuler. And the only reason I'm saying that, and you'll realise in a moment, when an author decides to wipe away several hundred years of Scottish history because it suits their plot better, that is a level of disrespect that needs to be addressed. And the reason I say that is because obviously Macbeth is based on a true story. So that's book number 22, and I'm going to see if I'm right. Okay, so that was Lady Macbethad. I was right. Daughter of an ousted king, descendant of ancient druids, as a child it is prophesied that one day Gruach will be the Queen of Alba. When she is betrothed to Duncan, heir elect, this appears to confirm the prophecy. She leaves behind her home, her family, and her close friend Macbethad, and travels to the royal seat at Scone to embrace her new position. But nothing is as Gruach anticipates. Duncan's court is filled with sly words and unfriendly faces, women desperate to usurp her position, and others whose motives are shrouded in mystery. As her coronation approaches, a deadly turn of events forces Gruach to flee Duncan and the capital. Finding herself alone, vulnerable, and at the mercy of an old enemy, her hope of becoming queen all but lost, Gruach does what she must to survive, vowing that one day she will fulfill her destiny and take up the future owed to her. I bought this because I love the play. I'm not going to say it. I'm not even on stage, but I know it's superstitious. I loved the idea of the book. I'd heard a lot of compliments about it, so I thought, why not? So I purchased it. It's quite heavy, and it sounded intriguing, and even the summary sounds intriguing, because in the play, of course, Lady Macbeth is never given a name. She is Lady Macbeth, but that review sounds quite okay, very, very negative. But it is a 1-star review, so time to pick the final book for October. And I'm hoping it's going to be something good and not something massively chunky. But you can never tell. And I can't determine. Okay, it's another blue one. Book number 25. Very much for smug marrieds only, and those who secretly hate their single friends are plotting to steal their husbands. Okay, so book number 25. Worst Idea Ever by Jane Fallon. And I kind of know where this is because I reshelved all my... They were all in a nice rainbow, but I couldn't find anything because I didn't know what colour the cover was, but I knew who'd written it. So I reshelved all of my books this afternoon. So I'm going to have to find that. So Worst Idea Ever by Jane Fallon. I actually got this one from a charity shop and I got it for a bargain. It was really good. I'd seen it on loads of people's shelves and I thought that looks kind of interesting, and I have read Jane Fallon in the past. So when Lydia starts an online business, her closest friend Georgia wants to help. So she sets up a fake Twitter account to pose as a potential customer. But then Lydia begins to confide in her new online buddy. Georgia knows she should confess the truth, but she just can't help herself. Until Lydia reveals a secret that could end their friendship and threaten Georgia's marriage. Georgia's in too deep, but what can she save? Her marriage, her friendship, or just herself? So that's Worst Idea Ever. And a very negative review about it. As someone who is not a smug married or anything but a happy single, I honestly don't know. I've never had any thought of cheating with someone's husband because that's just no. And the idea that that's what this is about is a bit uncomfortable. Anyway, the 3 books for this month: Horowitz Magpie Murders, so a cozy mystery; women's literature, Worst Idea Ever by Jane Fallon; and historical fiction. So I've got a balance again this month, and it's actually quite a nice way to do it. Even if I do struggle with some of the reads, they're books that I purchased, so I must have liked them at some point, right? And Lady Macbeth Ad by Isabel Schuler. So have you read any of these books? Did you like them? Do you agree with the 1-star reviews? Or are you thinking, well, that was kind of harsh, actually. I think that they were being really unfair. Let me know down in the comments. Let me know what you thought about the books. What do you think of this particular 1-star challenge thing? Do you think that I'm doing things the wrong way? Is there a better way to do it? Or have you got another idea for how I could get through my incredibly large and ever-growing TBR? Anyway, until next time, bye!